$18,000. That's what the average American pays over 3 years of leasing a car. $18,000 in monthly payments. And at the end of those 3 years, you hand the keys back. You own nothing. Not the car. Not the equity. Not a single dollar of what you paid. You gave $18,000 to a finance company and drove away with nothing to show for it. And here's the part that makes this the most brilliant financial trap in American retail. You did it because someone told you leasing was the smart choice. Lower payments. Always in a new car. No repair headaches. You walked away from that conversation feeling like you made the sophisticated decision. You didn't make the sophisticated decision. You made the most profitable decision for the dealership. And today I'm going to show you the math that proves it. Let's start with what a lease actually is. Because most people who lease a car don't fully understand the product they signed. When you lease a vehicle, you are not buying it. You are renting it from a finance company, usually the manufacturer's captive finance arm. Ford Motor Credit, Toyota Financial Services, BMW Financial Services. The dealership sells the car to the finance company. The finance company rents it to you. You make monthly payments for 24, 36, or 48 months. At the end, you return the car. The finance company sells it as a used vehicle, and they keep everything you paid. That's the structure. You are a tenant. The car is not yours. Now here is where the first number lives. The average new car lease payment in the United States is approximately $530 per month. Over 36 months, that's $19,080. Add the typical drive-off, first month, security deposit, acquisition fee, and most people walk out of the dealership having committed to over $20,000. At the end of month 36, that $20,000 buys you the right to return a car you've been living in for 3 years. The person who bought the same car instead of leasing it? After 36 months, they have a vehicle worth approximately $22,000 to $26,000, depending on the model. The difference between those two outcomes, what the buyer has versus what the lessee has, is not $18,000. When you factor in equity, it's closer to $40,000 over a typical decade of car use. If that math bothers you, subscribe. Because this is exactly what we do here. Here is the number the finance manager will never say out loud. The money factor. When you finance a car purchase, your interest rate is expressed as an APR, annual percentage rate. A number you can compare, Google, and understand. If someone offers you 6.9% APR, you know what that means. When you lease a car, your interest rate is expressed as a money factor. And it looks like this. 0.00187. That's not a percentage. That's a decimal. And most people who sign a lease agreement cannot tell you what interest rate they agreed to. Here's how to decode it. Multiply the money factor by 2,400 and you get the approximate APR equivalent. 0.00187 times 2,400 is equal to 4.49%. That's the real interest rate on your lease. But the finance manager never says 4.49%. They say 0.00187, which sounds like it's almost free. And here's where it gets deliberately worse. The money factor is negotiable. Most consumers don't know this. The finance company sets a base money factor, called the buy rate. The dealership is allowed to mark it up. Every additional point of markup on the money factor generates profit for the dealership. On a $40,000 vehicle leased for 36 months, a markup of just 0.0001 on the money factor generates approximately $108 in extra profit for the dealership. That sounds small, but the average dealer marks up the money factor by 0.0005 to 0.001. That's $540 to $1,080 in hidden interest charges over the lease term. You never see this number. It's buried in the decimal. And you agreed to it because 0.00187 doesn't sound like anything. Now let's talk about the residual value. The residual value is what the finance company says the car will be worth at the end of your lease. And it is one of the most powerful levers in determining your monthly payment. Here's the math. If you lease a $40,000 car with a residual value of $24,000, you're financing the difference. $40,000 minus $24,000 equals $16,000 of depreciation. That $16,000 plus interest gets divided across your monthly payments. So a higher residual value means a lower monthly payment. And a lower monthly payment is what sells leases. Here's the trap. Manufacturers set residual values artificially high on models they want to move. Not because those cars will actually be worth that much in 3 years. Because a high residual value makes the monthly payment lower. A lower monthly payment closes more deals. So what happens when you go to buy the car at the end of the lease? The purchase price is locked in at the residual value from your contract. The market value of that car after 3 years of real-world depreciation is frequently lower than the contracted residual. You are being offered the opportunity to buy a car for more than it's worth, at a price that was set not based on what the car would actually be worth, but based on what number would make your monthly payment attractive enough to sign. And if you choose not to buy it, the finance company sells it at actual market value. They already made money on your payments. The residual is just the structure that made those payments look affordable. Standard lease agreements come with a mileage allowance, typically 10,000 or 12,000 miles per year, which sounds reasonable until you look at how Americans actually drive. The average American drives approximately 14,263 miles per year according to the Federal Highway Administration. If you lease on a 12,000-mile annual allowance and drive the national average, you will exceed your limit by 2,263 miles per year. Over a 36-month lease, that's 6,789 miles over. The average overage charge is between 15 and 25 cents per mile. At 20 cents per mile, that's $1,358 due at lease return. But here's what makes this a trap rather than just a contractual term. The finance manager knows the national average mileage. The dealership knows you probably underestimate how much you drive. And the overage penalty is structured to be collected at the end of the lease, after you've already made 36 monthly payments and have no leverage. You can't negotiate the overage fee at return. You either pay it or dispute it in small claims court. Most people pay it. And there's a parallel trap at the other end. Some lessees deliberately drive less than their allowance, thinking unused miles have value. They don't. Unused miles under most lease contracts expire worthless. The mileage allowance is not a bank you can draw from or save into. It's a ceiling with a penalty for going over and no reward for staying under. There are 3 fees in most lease agreements that are almost never discussed at signing. The first is the wear and tear standard. When you return a leased vehicle, the finance company inspects it for what they call excess wear and tear. Every lease contract defines this differently, and the definition is always written by the finance company. A scratch larger than a credit card, a dent larger than a golf ball, tires below a certain tread depth, chips in the windshield. These are real-world things that happen to real-world cars over 3 years of normal use, and they are charged at the end of the lease. The average excess wear and tear charge at lease return is between $900 and $1,800 according to Edmunds and Consumer Reports data. Some manufacturers sell a wear and tear protection package at signing. The average price is $1,200 to $1,500. You are paying upfront to protect yourself from charges the finance company will assess using their own standards at the end. The second fee is the disposition fee. When you return a leased vehicle and do not lease another vehicle from the same manufacturer, you pay a disposition fee. This is a fee for the privilege of returning the car you rented. The average disposition fee is $300 to $500. It exists for one reason: to create a financial incentive to release rather than walk away. If you sign another lease with the same manufacturer, the fee is typically waived, which means the disposition fee is not a processing charge. It's a loyalty tax. The third is the acquisition fee, paid at lease inception, typically $595 to $1,095, sometimes called the bank fee or administrative fee. It is the finance company's charge for creating the lease. It is not negotiable. It is not disclosed prominently, and it is almost never mentioned in the advertisements featuring the attractive monthly payment. Add these 3 fees to your calculation. The lease that advertised $419 a month is not $419 a month. Everything about how leases are sold is designed to keep your attention on one number: the monthly payment. We covered this in the car dealership video, the Foursquare method, the way dealers use monthly payment to hide total cost. Leasing takes that mechanic and perfects it, because with a lease, the monthly payment is genuinely lower than a purchase payment on the same vehicle. This is mathematically true, and it is the most effective sales tool in the history of automotive retail. A $40,000 car purchased with $3,000 down and financed at 6% for 60 months costs $715 a month. The same $40,000 car leased for 36 months at a typical money factor costs $530 a month, $185 less per month. That's real money. That's a car payment, a phone bill, a grocery run. But the comparison is fraudulent. The purchase payment ends after 60 months. At that point, you own an asset. The lease payment ends after 36 months. At that point, you start a new lease, with a new payment, owning nothing. A person who buys a car every 5 years and keeps it for 10 makes roughly 2 purchase transactions per decade. A person who leases every 3 years makes roughly 3 or 4 lease transactions per decade. The same person, the same car budget. But the lessee never stops having a payment. Because the payment is the entire product. The finance company is not selling you a car. They are selling you a subscription to driving a new car. And the subscription never ends. Most lease contracts require you to carry GAP insurance. GAP stands for Guaranteed Asset Protection. If the leased vehicle is totaled or stolen, GAP covers the difference between what your auto insurance pays and what you still owe on the lease. This is a legitimate product. GAP insurance serves a real function. But here's how it's sold. Most lease agreements from manufacturer captive finance companies, Ford Motor Credit, Toyota Financial, BMW Financial, include GAP coverage at no additional charge, built into the lease structure. Many dealerships sell GAP insurance as an add-on anyway, because most consumers don't know it's already included. If your lease already includes GAP and you paid $800 for a separate GAP policy at the dealership, you paid $800 for a policy you didn't need on a vehicle you don't own. Before you buy any finance office product on a lease, read the lease agreement, specifically the section on total loss and theft. In most manufacturer leases, GAP is already there. The average consumer doesn't read the lease agreement before signing. The lease agreement is typically 40 to 60 pages. It is presented at the end of a 4-hour dealership visit. You are handed a pen and a stack of documents. This is not a coincidence. In 1976, Congress passed the Consumer Leasing Act. It requires lease contracts to disclose certain terms. The capitalized cost, what the car is being leased for. The residual value, the total of payments. The money factor, if asked. Note the last one. The money factor must be disclosed, if asked. Not proactively disclosed. Not explained. Not translated into APR for comparison. Just disclosed if you specifically know to ask for it. Most consumers don't know to ask. The Federal Trade Commission has brought actions against specific dealerships for deceptive lease advertising. Advertising a monthly payment without disclosing total cost, fees, or down payment requirements. In 2022, the FTC issued a proposed rule specifically targeting bait-and-switch tactics in auto retail, including lease advertising. The rule was finalized in 2024. Under the final rule, dealers are required to disclose total costs more prominently in advertising and are prohibited from charging for products not requested. Industry lobbying resulted in implementation being delayed. The NADA, the same organization that spent $40 million blocking all-in pricing reform on car purchases, filed legal challenges. The lease market in the United States generates approximately $150 billion annually in consumer payments. The financial infrastructure protecting it is proportionally resourced. Let's be precise. The manufacturer wins. They maintain control of the vehicle at residual value. They move new inventory on a predictable cycle. Their captive finance arm earns interest on every lease. And they get the car back in 3 years to sell as certified pre-owned at a premium. The dealership wins. Acquisition fee revenue. Money factor markup. Finance office product sales. And the lessee who returns the car is a pre-qualified return customer who will likely lease again. The finance company wins. The largest single beneficiary. They collect payments on vehicles they own. They collect fees for creating, maintaining, and closing the lease. And they sell the vehicle at the end for whatever the market will bear, which is often higher than the contracted residual if market conditions shift. You win, specifically and narrowly, if you are in a profession where you write off vehicle expenses and leasing creates a tax advantage. You genuinely drive fewer than 10,000 miles per year. You return the car in better condition than you received it. You never pay for products already included in the lease. You negotiate the money factor down to the buy rate. You calculate total cost of ownership before signing and compare it honestly to buying. And you treat the vehicle as a tool, not an identity. That is a narrow set of conditions. Most people who lease don't meet them. Most people who lease do so because the monthly payment is lower. And the lower monthly payment is the entire mechanism. Here's what I want you to sit with. There is nothing inherently wrong with leasing a car. In specific circumstances, for specific people, leasing is a rational financial decision. But leasing as it is sold in American dealerships is not presented as a rational financial decision for specific people. It is presented as the smart choice, the sophisticated choice, the choice that only people who understand money make. That framing is not accidental. It was developed by finance companies and dealership groups who understood that people will accept a worse financial outcome if you tell them it makes them look smart. The person who buys a reliable used car and drives it for 10 years is not the person the automotive finance industry wants to talk to, because that person is not particularly profitable. The person who leases a new car every 3 years, always having a payment, always in something new, always feeling like they're making the sophisticated choice, that person generates enormous revenue. For the manufacturer, for the dealership, for the finance company, and for the used car market, which is fed by off-lease vehicles at the exact residual values that were designed to make those lease payments look attractive. It is a closed loop. Every participant wins except the one who thinks they're winning. So what do you actually do with this? If you are considering a lease, calculate the total cost of the lease first. All 36 payments plus drive-off fees plus expected overage charges plus disposition fee plus estimated wear and tear. Then compare that total to buying the same vehicle used, 2 years old, with a 48-month loan. The used vehicle purchase almost always wins on total cost of ownership. The lease almost always wins on monthly payment. These are not the same number, and the industry is counting on you to keep looking at only one of them. If you want to understand how the rest of the systems work, bank overdraft fees, streaming subscriptions, gym memberships, grocery loyalty cards, subscribe to Think True. Because there's an entire architecture built around the same principle. The real story is never the one being advertised.